What's up, everybody? Nick Dwyer back for the 10th inning, here with another edition of This Day in Sports History. In yesterday's episode, we saw Dennis Martinez in 1991 and Kenny Rogers in 1994 throw perfect games in the MLB. We don't have any perfect games to talk about today, but we do have some no-hitters to get into, we have some more Tour de France to talk about, and we have the first international world title prize fight in history. So if y'all enjoy this video, leave a like on it. If you're new to the channel, like what you see, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get to it. This Day in Sports History. We start out today in 1751. That's right, 1751. At the first international world title prize fight, Jack Stack of England would defeat challenger M. Pettit of France in 25 minutes. I really don't have any more to say based off that. That's really all the information I could find, but that would be the first international world title prize fight. Now we move up a little bit over 150 years to 1906, and at the 4th edition of the Tour de France, René Potier would get his only Tour victory. 5 years later, in Major League Baseball, 1911, Boston Red Sox Joe Wood would no-hit the St. Louis Browns in a 5-0 victory. This would be his only no-hitter of his career, and 9 innings pitched on the day, 2 walks allowed, 12 strikeouts for Wood. We move up now to 1928, go to the Davis Cup, and France would defeat the United States in Paris 4-1 to win their second of 6 straight Davis Cups and their second of 10 overall championships. 6 years later, we have 2 separate events to talk about. We'll start with the Tour de France, the 28th edition, and Antonin Magne of France would get his second and final Tour victory. Then at the PGA Championship, Paul Runyon would win his first of 2 PGA crowns, defeating Craig Wood in 38 holes. We move up 14 years, and King George VI would open up the 14th modern Olympic Games in London. 3 years later in 1951, back to the Tour de France in the 38th edition, Hugo Colbert would claim his only Tour victory. 5 years later in 1956 at the US Open on the women's side, Kathy Cornelius, with a score of 7 over, would win her only major title after a 7-stroke victory in an 18-hole playoff over Barbara McIntyre. 1 year later, we moved to boxing, and Floyd Patterson would win via technical knockout over Tommy Jackson after 10 rounds to retain the heavyweight boxing title in his first defense. 11 years later in Major League Baseball, 1968, Cincinnati Reds' George Culver would no-hit the Philadelphia Phillies in a 6-1 victory for the Reds. Culver on the day, 9 innings pitched, 5 walks, 4 strikeouts, plus the Reds had 3 errors on the day, but they got the win. That's the important part. We move now to 1979 at the Canadian Open on the women's side, and Amy Alcott with a score of 7 under would win 3 strokes ahead of runner-up Nancy Lopez to win her first of 5 major titles. 5 years later at the Canadian Open in 1984, Julie Inkster with a score of 9 under would win 1 stroke ahead of Ayako Okamoto to claim her second of 7 majors. 5 years later in 1999, we have a world record to talk about when Javier Sotomayor would set the then high jump record at 2.44 meters or 8 feet 0 inches. By doing this, he would actually break his own record, and then 4 years later, he would go to break this record, and that record is still one that stands today. 1 year later, we move to 1990, and we start at the Curtis Cup Women's Golf, where the USA would win 14-4 over Great Britain and Ireland to claim their 19th of 28 victories. Then at the LPGA Championship in 1990, Beth Daniel, 4 under, would win her only major title, 1 stroke ahead of runner-up Rosie Jones. Finally in 90, at the Federation Cup in women's tennis, the US would retain the title with a 2-1 victory over the Soviet Union. Gigi Fernandez and Zina Garrison-Jackson would clinch the final victory with a 6-4, 6-3 win over Larissa Neiland and Natasha Zvereva. This would be the US's 14th of 18 overall titles. 2 years later in 1992 at the Barcelona Olympics, we have some world records to talk about and some gold medalists to talk about. We start with swimming, and Yevgeny Sadovyi would set a 400-meter freestyle world record at 3 minutes 45 seconds to win the 200-meter gold and the 400-meter gold at the Barcelona Olympics. Then in the pentathlon at the 92 Games, Arkadiusz Sherpazek with 5,559 points, would defeat runner-up Attila Meiser by 113 points to win the pentathlon gold medal, and Poland would also win the team gold medal. We now move up to 2001 and we're back to the tour. We're back to Lance Armstrong. He would win his third of 7 straight titles, but as we all know, they do not count anymore. He is now disqualified. Also in 2001, at the Copa America final, Colombia would defeat Mexico 1-0 after an Ivan Cordoba 65th minute goal, giving Colombia their only Copa America final championship. 2 years later in Major League Baseball in 2003, Bill Miller would become the first switch hitter, batting both left-handed and right-handed, to hit 2 grand slams in the same game. On the day, Miller would collect 9 RBIs in Boston's 14-7 victory over the Rangers. 4 years later in 2007, at the 94th edition of the tour, Alberto Contador would claim his first of 2 tour victories. Also in 2007, at the British Senior Open, Tom Watson, who played an even par, would win his 3rd Open Senior title, 1 stroke ahead of Mark O'Meara and Stuart Ginn. We move back to Major League Baseball now in 2008, and Ichiro Suzuki would reach 3,000 hits in professional baseball. Not his 3,000th hit in Major League Baseball, but professional baseball. Suzuki had reached 1,217 hits in Japan, and now he got his 1,722nd hit in his 8th season with Seattle to give him overall 3,000 hits. 4 years later in 2012, we go to the British Senior Open, and Fred Couples, with a score of 9 under, would win 2 strokes ahead of runner-up Gary Halberg. We stick with the British Open 1 year later in 2013, and Mark Wiebe, with a score of 9 under, would win after a playoff with Bernard Langer. We end today's video off with 3 separate events from 2018. We'll start with the British Senior Open, and Miguel Jimenez, with a score of 12 under, would win 1 stroke ahead of defending champion Bernard Langer. Then at the Tour de France, Geraint Thomas would become the first Welshman to win the Tour. Then at the MLB Hall of Fame induction, Chipper Jones, Trevor Hoffman, Vladimir Guerrero, and Jim Thome were all inducted by the BBWAA. They were also inducted with Alan Trammell and Jack Morris, who were brought in by the Veterans Committee. Chipper and Thome did get in first ballot. So there you have it. That's what happened on this day in sports history. If I left anything out, I do apologize. If I mispronounced any names, I also apologize. But I'll see everybody tomorrow for Nico Dwyer in the 10th inning. See ya.